Okay, so hello everyone. Once again, my name is Professor Puleng Sakalo, and today we're having a blast session. And in today's blast session, we're going to be focusing on motivation during and for your studies. We all know that sometimes it's a bit tricky as you are in the journey of your studies. You come across a lot of issues, a lot of challenges. So today we're not focusing on the actual content of part of your journey, but just the process and the journey itself, and maybe just give attention to some of the issues that you may encounter, some of the questions that you might be sitting with as well. So what we will do first is I'll do a brief presentation, maybe as a way also to get you thinking about where you are in your journey, some of the things that you're sitting with. And then for the rest of the time, I would like to dedicate that to you so that you can pose some of the questions that you might be having, some of the things that you might be struggling with. And I'll try as much as possible to respond, but also to try and motivate, because we know that PhD, master's, postgraduate studies can be quite lonely at times. And so some of the nuggets in terms of what is it that you can consider to make sure that you stay motivated in your studies. Okay. All right. So motivation during and for your studies. Okay. All right, so by way of starting, we know that when you're studying for your master's or your PhD, there's a lot of processes that you go through as a student, a number of maybe challenges along the way. One would imagine or would like to have a smooth journey, but in reality, there are sometimes some hurdles that one might experience along the way. So this session, therefore, is meant to try and offer some motivation to you. Within South Africa, within the continent, and I think even around the world, students tend to take varying times when it comes to completing their studies. We expect, or we hope that you would complete your master's degree in at least 2 years. We expect that it might take you, or it should take you 3 years, and then if not, it should take you 4 years to complete your PhD. But we are having some students who are in their 5th year, who might be in their 6th year. And the question is why? What is it that makes people take so long to complete their studies? What are some of the challenges that they're encountering along the journey of their studies? And here I just wanted to share reports, findings of a self-evaluation report from one institution, but which I thought could actually be very applicable to many other spaces as well, particularly some of the contributing factors that were highlighted as the ones that lead to possible delays when it comes to students completing their studies, right? So the first one being financial support. We all know that to study for even your undergraduate degree, but for your master's and doctoral degree, financial support is very important. It goes beyond just the registration fees. When you are done with the ethical clearance, you have to go into the field. You need to do the work in the lab. You need to collect your data, and collecting your data might require you traveling It might require you needing some support in terms of ensuring that you have access to the places where you need to go. So sometimes financial support can be a challenge. Being at UNISA as a student, you know that when you have successfully completed your proposal, and your ethics clearance, then you can apply for financial support from the institution. And UNISA tends to be quite generous when it comes to supporting students financially. So it's not only your registration fee. So when you're done with your proposal and have passed successfully, your registration fee can be paid for via a bursary. Of course, you have to apply for it. And then when you've successfully completed and received your ethical clearance, then when you apply for a bursary, you can get a full bursary, which applies also for your research activities as well. But we know that this is not a given. We know that not everyone who applies is going to get the bursary. So what happens when you don't get the bursary? And this is one of the things that leads to frustrations to some of the students. And here, the finding, as you can see, is that some students end up having to work part-time. Some even have to work full-time so that they can be able to afford paying for their fees. In a space or institution like UNISA, we know that many of our students are working anyway, but there's also a lot of students who are not working, who need to then find work so that they're able to support themselves financially. So financial support can be one of the reasons that delays the completion of students finishing their studies. And sometimes the delay might lead to also then just losing hope or losing interest and end up not completing your studies at all. So this leads to some students actually dropping out, right? So there's quite a number of students who do drop out along the way. And one of the reasons could be challenges with ethical clearance. In one of our previous sessions, a student was asking about process of ethical clearance and having to wait for a very long time before they can get clearance. And we know that without the ethical clearance as a requirement by the institution, you cannot go and conduct your data. And so that might be very frustrating on the one hand, but on the other hand, it may and it will or it does delay the journey of your studies, because without the clearance, you cannot go into the field, you cannot start doing the actual research because you need the clearance first. So if the clearance is going to take 3 months or 6 months, then it means your study is delayed by 3 months or 6 months. And I think this is something that the university is trying very hard to attend to. And as you would know, we've now gone online to try and make sure that we streamline the process and deal with the backlog where there is backlog. So ethical clearance application process is now online, and this is meant to make the process seamless and to also make the process quicker. So hopefully this as a challenge, which I know we've been having for quite a while, at least in some colleges and maybe not in other colleges, it's not the experience is not the same throughout the institution, that this is something that will be attended to. And then statistical and editorial support. Sometimes some students may find that it's inadequate or it's inaccessible. It's not easy to access. Again, in one of the previous sessions, as I draw from there, somebody did indicate that they were trying to get access to one of the software tools, Atlas TI, and having sent correspondence or email to ICT to assist with getting access, and that they have not received a response to that. So things like that also can be contributors to students taking longer to complete their studies. So I'm mentioning these things as a way for you to start thinking about them in advance and start thinking about what are some of the possibilities, or what are the routes, what are the steps that I can follow to ensure that if I encounter a particular hurdle, I know where to go, I know what to do, right? So through your supervisor, through your M&D coordinator, M&D office in your department, in your faculty, knowing the relevant offices and following accordingly where needed in following up. So also you need to take the responsibility as the student and not sit quietly. A month goes by, 2 months go by, 3 months go by, and you're not following up. So you also need to take that responsibility to make sure that you follow up so that you're not delayed unnecessarily with your studies. And when it comes to financial support, again, make sure that you're proactive. Do not only rely on financial support from UNISA. Do not only rely on applying or getting a bursary from UNISA. Make sure that you do your homework. Find out where are the other places where you can possibly get financial assistance, right? There is the NIHSS, the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, for those who are in the social sciences and humanities, that offers very generous financial support for PhD students, right? And it's not just financial support, but even mentorship throughout the journey of your studies as well. So there's that additional support that you would get as a student in addition to financial support. The National Research Foundation across all faculties, there's also funding there that as students you can apply for. There's the Oppenheimer Memorial Trust. These are just examples of the many financial opportunities that are there that you can consider as a student to try and make sure that you have one less thing to worry about. What we would like you to worry about is your actual study, the research, trying to figure out what methodology is relevant, trying to figure out what theoretical framework is relevant, and not having to worry, in addition to all of that, about where the money is going to come from for your registration and the actual research as well. So it's just very important, again, to make sure that you arm yourself with information, be proactive in the process. Okay, and those who are doing lab experiments, sometimes what the report indicated that sometimes research equipments can be a challenge. You want to run a particular experiment and you find that the equipment that you need for you to work with in the lab is non-functional, or it's there, it's not working properly, or it's not there at all. So then obviously that might delay the research that you want to conduct. Right, so making sure that machines, equipments are well maintained. So this is obviously the responsibility of the institution, so that you as a student busy with your lab experiments, the equipment and the space that you need for you to do your work is there and is functioning properly, because without that you will be delayed in terms of the studies that you need to do. Okay. And this next one is, I know, also relevant to us at UNISA. And here, as you can see, it was also highlighted in the report as one of the things that may make it or add the time or make it longer for students to complete their studies, that you are now required to submit a completed manuscript before you are allowed to submit your thesis or to graduate, right? And I know that some students tend to get worried about this process, especially if you have not published before. Maybe those of you who are doing your PhDs from your masters, you published something. If not published yet, you at least have submitted something, so you know the process and you know what's expected of you when you are submitting a manuscript for publication to a journal. A very different process, obviously, from doing research in writing for your thesis or for your dissertation. So It is a requirement at UNISA, as you know, and so what's important is how do you work with it? How do you make sure that you plan your things accordingly so that you're able to complete your study and then work on the manuscript, work together with your supervisor to look at what's the best way of going about doing this, because there are also different forms of manuscripts. We won't get into that tonight. But we are going to have sessions in the coming weeks focusing specifically on writing for publication. And these sessions are in place to ensure that you are supported as much as possible as students in starting to think about how to put together a manuscript, what's required, and how to ensure that your paper gets published. What are the things that you need to consider? And so this is meant to, again, alleviate some of the anxiety that many students experience when it comes to having to prepare a manuscript. And the idea is that hopefully this will assist in ensuring that you don't take too long to finish, because now maybe you are at an advanced stage of your PhD or your master's, but you're also stressing about the manuscript, trying to figure out how to put that together. And then that adds time towards the completion of your qualification. Okay, and this is not only unidirectional. It's not only something that is pointed towards the students, but also, as we know, as students, you are journeying together with your supervisors. The supervisors are also part of the process and therefore implicated in the process. So some of these delays or challenges or struggles may also affect the supervision relationship or process. And as the report states here, that delays in completion can sometimes cause frustration on the part of the supervisor. That I was hoping the student will finish in 3 years or 3.5 years. We are now in our 5th year, or we are now in our 6th year. I've lost interest in the topic. I don't see any progress. I want to take on more students. What's going on? So some of these things, or the processes, the delay or taking long, can also affect negatively the supervision relationship as well, right? And as we've indicated in some of the past sessions, that it's also about the topic and the timeliness, relevant, and why it's important for us to be asking this particular question or these particular questions in this moment in time. I had quite a number of students who submitted proposals or outlines on topics related to COVID-19, right? Because we know that between 2020, between 2020, 2021, moving into 2022, all that many of us could talk about was COVID-19. And so people were asking questions around COVID-19 and the different ways in which it has affected us. Socially, it has affected us politically, it has affected us economically, culturally, even if you think about our burial processes within an African context. So many of the things around us were shifting and people were asking questions. So in that sense, COVID-19 or topics related to COVID-19 could have been perceived as the hot research topics because of the relevance of them and the timeliness of them in the moment when the pandemic or the crisis was taking place. Is it still the same now? One could also ask that question. Looking back or looking at the after effects, looking at where things are as a result of it. So different kinds of topics can come through, but they're topics that would have been relevant or more relevant then. But if you're still working on a proposal, whereas maybe your supervisor or even yourself, we're hoping that by now you'll be working on your chapter 5. You see how that could be a challenge, right? Or maybe not the proposal, that's to I think that would have been too long of a delay, but maybe still the early chapters and not towards the finish line, right? So this idea that it may no longer be a novel idea or a novel research question that one might be interested in or as interested in as they might have been 3-4 years ago. Okay. And this also means, because even as we're thinking about the work that we're doing, we're at the same time thinking about those who are going to be reading the work. And some of the first people who are going to be reading your work are your examiners. That is outside of your supervisor. The next level is the examination, and therefore the examiners are going to be reading your work. So what kind of feedback, what kind of questions might the examiners have? What kind of discomfort or queries might they raise based on the work that you have produced? Okay. So this is obviously not an exhaustive list. I'm sure you can add some things here as well to say, why do students sometimes take long to finish? What have been some of your experiences? What are some of your own personal experiences? Have you been delayed? What are some of those issues? How have you tried or attempted to respond to them? I would like you to reflect on those even as we continue right now with this conversation. So some of the things that I would like to share with you today are also around things like autonomy, doing meaningful research, having clear goals and expectations. So having clear goals and expectations, again, what is it that you're hoping to achieve in 2024? So if you're working on your proposal, you might say, I would like to successfully complete my proposal and apply for ethical clearance, and by November or by the end of this year, to have received my ethical clearance so that I'm looking into 2025 to start doing the research. Is it an achievable goal? Absolutely, right? So you need to make sure that as you set your goals, as you set your expectations, and this is also linked to the kind of contract that you're going to put in place when it comes to conversation or conversations that you're going to be having with your supervisor, to say, between January and March, this is what I would like to do. This is what I promised to submit, and getting the feedback. This is what I hope to be working on as well. So this is very important because it assists you to look forward with a particular goal in mind, right? What is it that is your expectation? And when you have that clearly, then it also assists you to be able to say, what is it that I need to do, right, as a student, to make sure that I achieve those goals? You need to give time. You need to make time to focus on and to work on your proposal. You need to make sure that when you receive feedback, you attend to that feedback and resubmit as per the guidelines of your supervisor, right? You also need to hold your supervisor accountable in terms of timely feedback as well. It doesn't help for you to say you've got these goals where by August you need to have a completed draft of your proposal while having started at the beginning of the year, but it's difficult for you to get feedback or timeous feedback. So what were the agreements, or what was the agreement that you had with your supervisor in terms of how often you will submit and how long you should expect to wait before you receive feedback? Because without such a contract in place, then it becomes difficult also to hold me as your supervisor accountable, right? I don't know whether you have such contracts in place, and if you don't, it's never too late to start having a conversation with your supervisor about the contract. It is better to to have it written down where both of you agree on it. Students often write a timeline, or yes, a timeline in terms of what you are going to be doing each and every month. So there are different ways in which the conversation takes place between you and your supervisor. Supervisors work differently. But it is important, regardless of how the process unfolds or what it looks like, but that there has to be engagement, because that's the only way that you can be able to reach your expectations and your goals, and at the same time hold each other accountable, but also hold yourself as well as the student accountable. So you should not just rely on me as your supervisor, but you should also hold yourself accountable. And this links to the next point that I wanted to share around autonomy and ownership. Remember, at the end of the day, the name that's going to be on that master's dissertation or PhD thesis is going to be your name, right? You are the one who came up with this topic. And you got me to agree to journey with you, to guide you on this journey of attaining your doctoral degree, attaining your master's degree, right? So this is your research project, and therefore you need to own it. Sometimes some of the frustration around the journey is because you might be doing a research project that is not really something that is your passion. And my question would be, why? Why are you doing something that you are not really curious about, you're not passionate about? Because that's going to also show in terms of how motivated you are in doing the research that you're doing. I know there are different reasons and different ways in which people end up doing their master's or their PhD. Those that are lucky can just dream up a topic, come up with a topic, based on something that they're very curious about, work on that. But some, again, and it's linked to financial challenges, could be because there's a project that exists that I have as a supervisor, and I'm offering also bursaries. I'm supporting students to be part of my research team. So from being part of my research team, what you as a student come out with is a qualification, but your qualification is going to be part of a bigger project. And it's wonderful if that project is also part of your passion. And I would imagine that if a supervisor puts out an advert, for example, or a call to say looking for doctoral students or looking for master students, that you will also look first at the alignment between your interests and the person's interest, so that at the end of the day, even if you're part of a bigger research project, you can still own it, because it's something that you're going to contribute to, but at the same time, it's something that you're also passionate about. So have ownership of the research project that you're doing. Sometimes when feedback comes, in your proposal, whether from me as a supervisor or whether from the review committee, people read the work and they see potential in different ways. They see possible or different ways in which the question could be asked. And sometimes that might lead to the project looking very different from what maybe you had in mind or intended. Remember, as a student, as I said, it's your project, you need to own it. So you also need to be able to make an argument for the project that you're putting on the table. And if you're able to make an argument for it, even when I come and say, no, but why don't you consider doing focus groups instead of individual interviews? Why don't you consider going this way instead of that way? And of course, I'll also provide my reasons for it. But then you can say, while I see the legitimacy of that suggestion and I see how that could work, the reason why I wanted to do it this way is because this is what I was thinking, this is what I would like to achieve. And I think doing it this way will assist me to be able to attain that. So me saying, why don't you do it this way? Or why don't you consider focus group might not necessarily mean what you suggesting, what you have put forward is necessarily wrong, right? It might be that I think it might work better, or it might, how do I put it? But doing it in this particular way might offer a different view of approaching the topic, but not necessarily a better view or the right view from what you have provided, meaning that yours was wrong, right? I hope I'm making sense. So at the end of the day, what's important is that you need to be able to make a claim and then justify that claim, make an argument for that claim, convince me that this is how you want to do it, and this is why you want to do it, and this is why it makes sense doing it this way. All right. And then, of course, we don't do research just for the sake of doing research. Yes, we're curious. We ask questions. We're living in a world where there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of social ills. And we speak about the importance of thinking creatively, the importance of innovative ways of looking at things, coming up with innovations to assist us to respond to certain challenges. I'm sure you all have smartphones, and we have endless upon endless apps, an app for this and an app for that and an app for that. And it's because someone sat and said, but how do we respond to this? How can we easily respond to that? How can we create a space where people can do 1, 2, 3, right? And so there's always an opportunity to do research. There's always a reason to do research. But doing meaningful research is very, very important. Why are you doing this study in the first place? What is it that you want to achieve, right? It might be curiosity that you have. You want a better understanding of something. That's okay. But why? Why do you want a better understanding of something? Why do you want to explore that phenomena? Why is it important for us to spend time and energy and resources exploring that particular phenomenon? So it's also very important to think about these questions as well, right? Because if your research is not based on you having asked yourself those questions, then at some point you might be bored, or you're going to get bored by your study, right? And that's when you lose motivation as well. So from the onset, think about whether you can sit with that topic for the next 3 years at least. Is it something that you can wake up and look forward to doing? Wake up and look forward to reading those references, those sources, right? Because you can't wait to hear what other scholars are saying, so that whether you can see your thinking is alongside or aligned to theirs, or whether you can find ways to critique what they're looking at, whether you can find those gaps from what they have done, right? So this excitement. I need to meet you 3 years down the line and still see that excitement that was there when you started with your studies, right? And that can only happen if you're studying something that you actually believe in. And celebrate the milestones along the way. I spoke about some of the challenges that one might perceive, taking long to get feedback, taking long to get the outcome of ethical clearance, taking long for this and that, not getting a bursary when you apply for it. So some of these things that can dampen your spirit along the way. But there's also opportunities and definitely positives in everyone's journey, right? When you get that feedback saying that I'm very happy with this chapter, so much improvement. Now I can understand what you're saying. Now I can see it's very clear what it is that you want to do. This makes sense. Let's move on to the next chapter. That's a milestone, right? And just take a moment to pause and celebrate that, because then it also revives you. It gives you, a renewed energy in terms of enjoying the work that you're doing. Focus on the positive and not just the negative. And as I say, this is a journey. So we have a lot of speed humps in South Africa, right? So there's a smooth road somewhere along the way, but at some point in whatever town or city or township that you'll be traveling in, you are bound to come across a speed hump along the way. So embrace that speed hump, knowing that after this speed hump, the road is going to be smooth again, right? So celebrate those milestones as they come along the way. And I started this session saying that postgraduate studies sometimes can be a lonely journey, right? It's you and your supervisor and all these sources that you're reading. It's the library, it's the books that you're reading, that you're immersed in. So you need to proactively create or find an academic community that is within your area that you can be a part of, right? Support from your peers, other students doing the same qualification or doing their postgraduate students. Do you know some of the students doing postgraduate studies at UNISA? Have you been in contact? Have you been in conversation? And what are some of the things that you have learned and can learn? Sharing of experiences. Maybe you're just starting off in your journey, and here I am, I'm doing my third year. So much that you can learn from me. So many things that maybe that you don't have to go through that are hurdles, that engaging with me might make your journey a bit smoother, right? So connect with other students, attend seminars. UNISA has got lots and lots of seminars. So when you look at the announcement, the e-news, when you're on my UNISA, there's always a seminar on something. Yes, attend the seminars related to research, right? On how to write for publication, on how to use Turnitin, all of them. Wonderful. But also attend seminars that are geared towards academic debates and academic engagements. So be academically active. Attend scholars' work or attend seminars where scholars' work are aligned to your work. Listen to the debates, ask questions, share your work even as well, right? That, I find the presentation was very interesting. I find that this presentation actually resonates with what I'm currently thinking about, grappling with. I'm still busy with my proposal. My work is on this and that. And your research resonates with some of the things that I'm thinking about, right? So it can even raise some questions for you, or it can even be a light bulb moment, that aha moment for you. But that can only happen if you engage, right? And I'm saying this as someone who is part of many seminars on campus, and I hardly see some of the students. And I know some of you are working, very busy, but many of the seminars are online, right? You don't have to attend one every week. You don't have to attend one every day. But look, as the seminars are advertised, look at that which speaks to you once in a blue moon, but attend something, right? Make time even in your busy schedule, because then it also takes you away from that busyness that sometimes might not be linked or related to your studies. And in moments where maybe you're even feeling that, oh, where am I going exactly? Where's this? I'm not seeing progress. Attending academic engagements, academic seminars, webinars can actually reignite, right? It can actually bring you back from that place that you might be finding yourself in, where you're saying, oh, this is just hectic for me, it's difficult for me, and you just want to take a pause. And while you take a pause, 2 months go by, you have not done any work, right? So please make sure that you are an academically active student. And in the midst of all of this, taking care of yourself is very important. And always say healthy mind is a healthy body, or a healthy body and a healthy mind go hand in hand. So do not neglect your health and do not neglect your well-being. Have hobbies, go for a walk, right? Join if you like sports. What is the sporting coach that you like? Be active. It's also good for your health, no, not just for your physical health, but for your mental health as well. So taking care of yourself is also very, very important. Taking time out for yourself is very important, because when you do that, when you come back to do your work, you'll find that you might be having renewed energy, where you are able to engage and focus on your work as well. Okay, so I spoke about attending academic engagements, but you need to also find opportunities, possibilities, to also even just go beyond attending, but to also looking at people who inspire you in the work that you're doing. Who are you referencing? Who are the scholars whose work you draw from, right? Some of them speak at conferences. Drop them an email. Some of them are very responsive. So you've read my paper and you found it interesting, you've engaged with my paper, and maybe it left you also with questions as well. Write an email, say, dear so-and-so, I read your paper recently published, or your paper that was published 5 years ago that focused on this and that. I read it with great interest, and it left me with a number of questions. And I was wondering whether I can have a conversation with you about it. Generally, some academics tend to be very generous, and people will give you their time to have conversations. So do not only limit yourself to just reading the work. And yes, speak from experience as well. And believe you me, it works wonders. And some of those people that you just started by dropping an email to end up having people that you collaborate with in future. Remember, you are interested in a particular field, a particular topic. You're doing a PhD, and especially if you're interested in academia, you're doing a PhD. You have these questions, you're focusing on a particular issue, and it's also an opportunity beyond your doctoral studies to also ask more questions, to work on bigger projects where you build on the work that you've done. And what better way to look at possibilities of working with those whose work you've drawn from in your own work as well. They can be your mentors. As an emerging researcher, you start working with them, right? So, and these are people beyond your supervisor. And be flexible and adaptable, right? Be open to changes and shifts that might mean that you're going to encounter some detours from your initial proposal. So I spoke about owning your research. It's important to own your research. Sometimes feedback comes. You might agree with some parts, disagree with some parts. You agree with some parts, and agreeing means maybe rethinking certain aspects, rethinking certain things. And sometimes when you are done with your proposal, you start doing the research, you start doing the work, and you realize that there are some things that you need to do differently from what you had proposed, right? So you have your ethical clearance, you go out, and remember, when you are applying for ethical clearance is so that you can get the key to be able to go out there to do that research, to get the key to go open that lab room so that you can go in there and do your experiments, right? And you might find that, yes, now I have my clearance and I want to do the work, but you're unable to do the work in a way that you had hoped to do. I recently had a case with one of my students. This is something that does not happen often. I actually think this is the first time I'm experiencing this with a student where they received the clearance and they now go into the particular community where they want to do the research, the institution where they want to do the research. And unfortunately, they were denied access, right? But remember, you have a clearance for a particular focus, a particular sample in a particular space. And unfortunately, that did not work out in the way that we had intended. So that meant retracing our steps and going back and saying, okay, how do we now rethink the study in a way that we don't lose the focus of it, but now we need to rethink the sample, or rather where the sample is going to be based. And that then meant also revisiting the ethics clearance and then going back to the ethics committee to have that conversation. And of course, the institution anticipates such things, that we know that it's not a given that when you go out there to do the research, that all the time people are going to say yes. No, some people might actually say no. And so there's an opportunity for the amendment of your ethical clearance if the actual overall focus of the study is not changing, then there is an opportunity for amendment. And if you had already set your mind to doing your research in a particular way, in a particular space, of course, as a student, you might feel taken aback a bit. You might feel a bit of setback, right? Which was the case here also. And that's why I'm saying being flexible and adaptable is very important. Keep that at the back of your mind all the time, that you might move forward, but you might come across hurdles that might require a rethinking in terms of some aspects of your research, and what are the implications of that, therefore, and how do you then adapt to that change so that you're still able to move forward. Okay. And then one of the ways, again, to do the work is to break the tasks into smaller parts, right? How are you going to be doing this work? What are you going to be focusing on first? Do not focus on 2 or 3 things at the same time, because it might get overwhelming. You might feel overwhelmed, and sometimes some people, when they feel overwhelmed, then everything just shuts down. Then you are not productive at all. So find ways to make sure that you break tasks into smaller parts, and this way you do not feel overwhelmed, right? Focus on something, and it's okay saying, and this then would go back to your timelines as well. How realistic are you being, right? That you're going to work on chapter 1, you're going to work on chapter 2. How long do you give that? You need to also consider that there's going to be feedback that you're going to get, and maybe that feedback would mean you're not going to move to the next chapter immediately. It means that now you're going to work that extra month that you had hoped it's going to be for another chapter, but because there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this particular chapter, then there is a shift in terms of the process, or in terms of the timelines, and you know, make room for that as well, right? So and if you know that you've got particular tasks, you know that these tasks might not necessarily be completed in a month or 2. And so even in how you allocate your time, you need to always be thinking about these possibilities. Okay. There are resources that are available to you as UNISA students, a lot of resources. I spoke about financial resources in terms of bursaries, where within UNISA there is really, really generosity in that regard. But there's also other resources that are available. You have a library at disposal that has a huge repository. You can go physically to the library, or even remotely. Our library is one of the biggest libraries in the world, right? And for each of your disciplines, there is a subject librarian. Make sure that you utilize these services that are made available to you. Utilize these services so that you don't feel stuck and then time is wasted unnecessarily. Find out what is available to you. Sometimes when you feel overwhelmed, you talk to your supervisor, but there's also other spaces or places that are there to offer support. There is a wellness clinic that's available. There's the student counseling unit at the university that you can always contact and consult if you feeling overwhelmed and you feel that you need someone that you can talk to. So these tools and resources, make sure that you reach out and you utilize them because they're there for your benefit. And then dealing with feedback and reflecting on that feedback is also very important. Learn from your setback and adjust your approach. So you've written a chapter and it comes back and there is track changes. And when you look at these 20 pages, it looks like, oh my goodness, there isn't a page where I don't see red. And sometimes that might be overwhelming. You submit a chapter and you are now on your 6th draft, right? You're told again, please go revise, go and revise, right? And as I've indicated earlier, also refusal from participants to participate or gatekeepers refusing to grant you access so that you can be able to access the participants. So there's also different ways, different levels in which this happens. But also what's still coming for you, right, is that your work is going to be scrutinized, right? So even as you get that feedback with track changes and it looks like there's scribbles everywhere, remember this is part of the journey, this is part of the learning process. And we're doing this so that at the end, we try and minimize the possibility of the examiner's reports coming back and saying that, no, you need to do major revision and re-register and resubmit, or this is not acceptable at all, and therefore you fail. That's what we want to try and avoid as much as possible. Of course, we can never know how the examiners are going to read your work. It's always a subjective process. We get people who are experts in the field, people who are experts in the topic that you are writing on, and therefore we trust that their feedback is meant to make sure that when that dissertation or thesis goes out there and you have your name on it, that you can also be very proud of it. So whether the feedback comes back and it's very positive, which would be wonderful, or whether it comes back and it's very critical, the examiners are very critical, it's so that you can rework, revise, relook, and really it's an opportunity for you to make sure that you provide a good output, right? The best report possible, thesis, dissertation possible. So critical examiner report also would require you to sit and reflect. And we're here as supervisors. Remember, we're journeying with you. So when it comes back and they say, no, the student should go back to the drawing board, they must sit and now work again and major revision. It's for me and you as the student, as the supervisor, to sit together and say, what does this feedback say? What is it that maybe we might have overlooked? How is this feedback going to assist us to improve on what we have already produced? Because remember, when that feedback comes, it does not necessarily say you have not done any work or your work is not good enough. It's saying these are some of the ways in which this work could even be better. Right? These are some of the ways that this work could really provide something novel to the field. It can provide the kind of contribution that it has the potential to provide towards the particular discipline and taking that discipline forward. Okay, so it's really just very important for us to sit and think about how we deal with feedback and reflecting on that feedback. And then resilience and perseverance. Remind yourself why you decided to embark on this journey in the first place. So if I were to ask you right now, why are you doing a master's degree? Or I ask you, why are you doing a doctoral degree? How would you answer me? What would your answer be? And I'm hoping that that answer that you would give me, is the kind of answer that you can always go back to when you feel overwhelmed, or the answer that you go back to when you feel like giving up, right? So it's the kind of answer that will keep you resilient, and it's the kind of answer that will make you persevere and see the project to its end, right? So that is really my hope in this regard. And as I've indicated, I just wanted to just share these few thoughts, nuggets, to just get you thinking and reflecting. And the idea here was really to offer just few points of motivation, because doing a PhD or a master's, postgraduate studies generally, really, can be quite hard, can be quite lonely, can be quite difficult. And so what are some of the things, some of the ways in which one could try and minimize that loneliness or feeling that the process is hard? What is it that we can put in place in that regard? And I hope that these few points of motivation have assisted towards that direction in assisting you to think about what are some of the ways that could assist you to make the process easier, to put things in perspective for yourself, because I think what we want is to make sure that you don't give up along the way. Okay, that's not what we want. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to pause here, and then I'm going to move to the questions that you have put forward. And I hope that in these questions we can continue these conversations, and that perhaps also what you ask can also be motivating to other students. And please also share some of the things that have worked for you, that are working for you, that we can also maybe then just share with other students that they can learn from. Okay. All right. So the first one, good evening, Prof. The UNISA MDSP. So this stands for the Masters and Doctoral Support Program. The MDSP bursary does not cover for data analysis, co-coder, and transcriber. Why is that? The reason for that is that, I apologize. The reason for this is because the expectation is that you do this work, right? You transcribe yourself. And that through this process, you are able to engage with the data, to engage with the work. It's only the MDSP that does not cover for this, because and please note the MDSP is for staff members who are also students at the university, and then for the rest of the students, the bursary is just the UNISA bursary, M&D bursary. Okay, so just also to differentiate, in case some might say, what is the MDSP? Who qualifies for the MDSP? Is for the staff members of the university. Okay, and then for the rest of us, or for the rest of you, there is the normal UNISA bursary that you can apply for. And it does not state directly, but I know in conversations that we've had, the idea is that no, when you code, we're expecting you to be doing that work, right? So if you're using Atlas TI, for example, for coding, there's already that software that does the coding for you, and therefore the co-coder, if you will, has to be yourself as the researcher, because if we now outsource some of these things, the question is what role are you playing as the researcher in doing this work? All right, so I hope that makes sense. But of course, Anonymous, you can always apply for other bursaries as well. There are other external bursaries that one could apply for, and the kinds of restrictions are very different for different bursaries. And if you really feel that you need someone who's going to assist you to transcribe, then I would encourage you to apply for another bursary. But if you're already at this stage, unless if you're thinking ahead, but if you're already at this stage, I'm not sure whether you can apply for a bursary or a scholarship when you are towards the end of your studies, really, because now it means you have collected your data, you are now looking into the results and analysis. And so, yes, so that is the reason why. So if maybe you need assistance with coding, for example, I would encourage you to draw from or use Atlas TI. And then Atlas TI can be your co-coder, or your coder, and you can be the co-coder. Okay, so that is the reason why. Okay, how does the new online ethical clearance process, how long is that the question? Or are you saying how does it work? Because your question reads, how does the new online ethical clearance process take? So I'm going to assume that you are saying how long, right? How long does the new online ethical clearance process take? It really depends. The online process allows for the ethics committee to continuously work on the applications that come through, right? Whereas with the previous process, it was manual. So you complete the form, you submit the form to someone, and then there is an ethics committee that then sits, and the ethics committee sits whether once a month or twice a month. And then the colleagues would look at the applications individually, independently, and then come together as the committee. So as you can see, again, depending on when you submit, if you submit on the 14th and the committee sits on the 17th, chances are maybe your application would not have made it into the agenda, and therefore it would then sit in the next committee, right? And that's how then the time accumulates as well. And so with the online ethical clearance, it's meant to be able to deal with those challenges or that waiting period. So it takes a shorter period of time. It's difficult for me to say it takes a week or it takes 2 weeks because, again, it's very different. It's not a central process. It's still very different according to the different faculties or different colleges. And so you can check with your supervisor and get a sense. Hopefully your supervisor has already gone through the process with another student and they have an idea of how long that took. I just received feedback today from one of my students, and I think we had submitted less than a month ago, right? At the most a month. So I'd say maybe give yourself a period of a month at the most. Also because of the number of applications that are received each and every day. We have how many thousands of students now? I don't remember off by heart. But remember, even as you submit your application, there are other students that might have already submitted before you. And so it's going to go according to who submitted first. So first come, first serve type of process. So it might be quicker, it might be short. So depending also when you are submitting, and maybe when you are submitting, there isn't a lot of applications in queue. And therefore it might be quicker than the next student who might submit, only to find that when they submitted, there's also many other students who are submitting or who have submitted. So the time that it will take for that student and for this student might not necessarily be the same. Okay, but in a nutshell, it definitely is meant to take a shorter period now that it's gone online. The process hasn't been in place for a very, very long time. And therefore, obviously, with everything else, there's always that teething process. There's always that process when the migration and getting used to the new system might also mean that it takes a bit long. But we're hoping that with time, it's going to be a very quick process, right? I know in other places and institutions where they're doing it online like that, within a week, feedback is received by the students. So the idea is that we move towards that direction, where within a week you might be having feedback for your ethics clearance. Okay, I hope that helps. I know that is not a clear-cut answer that you might have expected in terms of saying it's going to take 3 days or it's going to take 2 weeks. Apologies, but it is an ongoing process where hopefully we get to a point where we have a specific answer in that sense. Okay. Okay, Anonymous, I understand. You need assistance with Turnitin because it's such a pain. There was a time when we were having challenges with Turnitin, and remember that some of these software packages that we use, right? Some of these systems that we use as the institutions, we also reliant on external assistance, if you will. We buy a license to be able to use some of the packages, and then at some point the license runs out, and then we have to renew the license, and sometimes that might be a long process. And the same with Turnitin. Remember, there was also a migration because we're trying to make it as seamless as possible. And have it also in the system as part of the processes that you go through as a student and not as a standalone, where when you're done, then there's Turnitin that you need to apply for, which is sitting somewhere else. And there again, it's that process of getting it to work seamlessly. I know that it's been a challenge for many students, so I can sympathize with you, because even with my own students, it's one of the challenges that we've been having. It continues to be work in progress. And I do apologize that you're finding it to be a pain in the neck. And I really hope that we'll get to a point where it's no longer a pain in the neck. But like I was saying when I was presenting that, please make sure that you follow up. I know that sometimes it can be frustrating, but please do follow up. And where possible, get your supervisor involved as well. I know you send emails and you follow up and then there's no response, or you're not getting assistance. And sometimes maybe a second request or someone else requesting alongside you can be helpful. So please do get your supervisor involved in the process as well. And hopefully they'll be amenable to assisting. Okay, recently UNISA has integrated Turnitin into my UNISA. Exactly. So that's what I was talking about earlier with this processes of integration, so that it's not a standalone process, right? That it's part of your My UNISA journey. So that integration process took a bit of time, and for some time it actually wasn't functional, it wasn't working, where we actually needed to submit the documents and then get the feedback. But I know with some of my students recently that they've been able to get access to Turnitin and then be able to use it. So here is the question or comment. That UNISA has integrated Turnitin into my UNISA, correct, and limited the slots for submissions to only 3 slots. In addition to that, UNISA has also made restrictions with regards to chapters submitted earlier. The My UNISA Turnitin would give an error message such as assignment submitted 131 days earlier. Yeah, if you have submitted your previous chapter, correct. And in turn, not mark it. Please speak to the Turnitin section. They are not helpful at all. A submission will remain queued for days, and when we send emails, Nobody responds. It is very frustrating. Please help us. They also need to increase the slots and turn it in to at least slots per chapter. 3 is not enough. Okay, Anonymous, I've taken note of your concern, and I will make sure that I talk to my colleagues so that we send this through to our Turnitin colleagues, and then hopefully we'll get feedback that we'll then share with you. And my colleagues who are listening in Dineo, please also just make sure that we note this, and then I can follow up and make sure that we send the request accordingly, and highlighting and indicating this challenge that has been raised by the students. Okay. Okay. Hello, Ms. Omsa. Manuscripts should be published at the Scopus journals. To do this, it takes time. For that, can the candidate publish it every Scopus journal without the permission of supervisor? Ms. Omsa, I'm not sure I understand your question, but I'm going to respond broadly, but maybe just by correcting something first. Okay, so the outputs, the manuscripts that you need to submit need to be on the DHET, on journals that are on the DHET accredited list, okay? And Scopus is but one, all right? So the Scopus is the database, right? And DHET itself also has the database, but within the DHET, there's also an accredited list. So it could be Norwegian, it could be ISI, it could be Scopus. There's quite a list, right? So it's not only Scopus, Ms. Omsa. And you are correct. Publishing an article takes time, right? If you're publishing your article in a reputable journal, it is going to take time, and it takes time because there is a review process that the article has to go through. I'm going to encourage you to please attend the publication sessions that we're going to have, I think towards the end of this month, where we're going to be tackling this issue around how to publish and what does it mean to publish and how long does it take, and why it takes long. So remember, the university does not require you to have already published, but you need to have completed the manuscript and have submitted the manuscript, right? So also because we as the institution understand that it takes long to publish. And if you're going to now divert your focus to making sure that you focus on completing manuscripts and submitting them and making sure that they get published before you finish your thesis or dissertation and submitting, then we understand that it's going to delay. Remember what I said at the beginning of the session, it's going to delay you completing your qualification, and we don't want you to be delayed completing your qualification. So especially for your PhD where there's 2 manuscripts that are required. So imagine if we were expecting them to already be published, that would be a challenge. Do other students already have them published? Yes. We have seen students who have the manuscripts published. So it also depends sometimes on the discipline. We know that those who are in the hardcore sciences, in engineering and other hardcore sciences, the way in which the actual process of supervision works is very hands-on and interactive. So you're actually running the experiments, you're testing things, you're doing the work. And as you're doing that work, you're also writing up on it, but at the same time, you publish the results that you get along the way. So it's not only about the end result, but also the process as well, which is very different with the humanities, the social sciences, where the the results come after you've collected the data. And in our previous session, we were talking about the importance of coding and finding categories and coming up with themes. And it's going to be very difficult for you to do that if you've only done two interviews out of the 20 interviews and saying, no, these are the themes that are coming up. That's going to be difficult. There could be themes that are emerging, but there could also be a shift and a change along the way as you do more interviews. So the processes and the ways in which things work very different. So you might find that some students in other disciplines actually have published manuscripts by the time they graduate. Some students, not necessarily so, right? And that's why the students say you need to have submitted, not necessarily have published, taking into consideration that, yes, it takes time, but also the processes of doing research in the different disciplines also differ, and therefore that will have an influence in terms of how the process would unfold when it comes to publishing. All right, I hope that answers your question. What was the second part? Can the candidate publish in every Scopus journal without the permission of the supervisor? First of all, please note that you need the permission of the supervisor to publish your manuscript, especially if it's work that is from your PhD or your master's research, particularly work that is ongoing, right? Because it's also very important to think about the results of the work. What is it that you want to put out there already and not? So that at the end, we do not have a situation where we are asked, but what is new, what is novel here? Because this work is already out there, it's already published, right? So even how you publish the work is very, very important. When you're publishing something that's part of an ongoing project, that has to also be explicitly indicated in the manuscript itself that this work forms part of a bigger project. This work forms part of my dissertation, right? So, and these are some of the nuances that one can only do or be able to do in conversation, in consultation with the supervisor. So you cannot, Ms. Omsa, publish without the permission of the supervisor, or it is not recommended. It's not ideal at all. Okay, so I would encourage you to make sure that you are in conversation with your supervisor, and this is for everybody, that you are in conversation with your supervisor when it comes to publishing work that is based on your master's or doctoral ongoing research. Okay. All right. Recently, UNISA has integrated the Turnitin. Okay, this is a question that's already been put up and that's been responded to. And as we've indicated, we'll follow up on the Turnitin challenges and hear what our colleagues are saying. Okay, I think we'll give feedback in our next session, which I think will be the one on publications. And this will still be relevant there because even with the publication, even with your articles that you're going to be sending out for publication, it is ideal that you subject your manuscript to Turnitin so that the editor should not come back and say, there's problems with this manuscript. So we always want to be on the safe side. Okay. All right. Can the university please not default the reference list on a thesis or dissertation when counting the similarity score? Because supervisors give us a hard time when it comes to this. On that note, is it possible? Okay. So what you're saying is there seems to be a miscommunication or a disconnect in terms of what the supervisors are expecting and what the university is expecting. I think you're raising very valid and important points, and I think that's why even as we're having these sessions with you as students, there's also sessions that are being had with the supervisors as well, separately. And I think such issues are important, that as they're raised here, that we also raise them in the sessions with the supervisors as well, so that we can all be on the same page. But also, I think at the university level, when it comes to what the university is expecting, but also then what the supervisors believe should be in place, there should be a synergy, and we should all be on the same page. Because if we're not, then we're going to obviously confuse you as the students, as the students, and that is not what we want to do. We do not want to confuse you. Because that will then lead to frustrations that you might end up having, right? Is it possible to obtain a 10% score on a Turnitin or less? Yes, it is possible. It is possible. I've seen it. It's not common, absolutely not common, because sadly, as we know, many of the software that we use also have their limitations as well. So we know that sometimes Turnitin does pick up work that has been referenced. And that is why we don't call it a plagiarism tool, but it's a similarity tool. It provides us with a similarity index, not necessarily plagiarism, because you might find that your score is 35%, but when we actually now study the report, looking at it vis-a-vis the actual work that you've produced, you might find that it has picked up work that you have referenced, right? So you've referenced this work, but then it has picked it up anyway. So there's also, I think, a lot of updating that is required with the software, because then that also leads to extra work for us as the supervisor, as the student, in trying to now look specifically at each and every line to look at what is it that has been picked up, and how we can then attend to what has been picked up. Obviously, the university understands that this is a similarity index, and the supervisor can always write a report indicating that they have looked at the report and they've studied the report, and this is what they picked up, that even though it says 32%, this is what it picked up, right? And of course, there are things that would require revising, paraphrasing, rethinking, proper referencing. Sometimes you've referenced, but you did not include page numbers, but you actually took the work verbatim from someone's work. Obviously, then that is problematic, right? Yes, you've referenced, but you did not reference properly, and then the system picked it up. And then so it helps us, it's useful, so that we can go back and then attend to the work. All right. So I hope that answers you. And I hear you on the reference list in terms of counting the similarity score, because there's always this request to say it will be easier if we just take out the reference list. But the argument is that the reference list is part of the whole document. And so if you take out the reference list, then you have not submitted the whole document, right? I know some supervisors, we would advise the student and say, no, take out the reference list because it's the one that's actually making the percentage to shoot up. So if we take it out, let's see what's there, because the reference list will still put it back there again. But then the way that the proper Turnitin reporting is that you need to put everything onto the system. And so if it comes back and it says 38, and then as you scroll down, you look at the reference list, much of it is there, then that's something obviously that one can write into the report, right? And if the referencing has been done properly in text and in the reference list, there's always an opportunity or a possibility for the percentage to go down. And one of the things that is always said when you go for Tenet in training, in terms of understanding how to use it properly, is to also not just look at the percentage, but also look at the individual inputs as well. That you'll find that, yes, it says 30%, which might appear high, but when you look at the breakdown, you'll find that it's a long list, but all of it says less than 1%, less than 1%, less than 1%. So if the percentage is high, maybe more than 1%, 3%, 5%, 7%, obviously that's a serious cause for concern to say, something is not right there. But sometimes even if it picks up, then you'll find that it says less than 1% because it picks that the work has been acknowledged, but maybe it wasn't acknowledged properly. Like I said, maybe you didn't put the page number. Sometimes you have, and it still picks it up. So there's sometimes a discrepancy in terms of how the system works. So that's why sadly, it still requires human intervention. And human intervention means me and you as the student and supervisor to also look at it, and where needed, revise. And where there's an argument to be made, then we provide the report that goes with that Turnitin report. Okay, but also when the report gets to someone who also understands how to read the report, they'll also have a look at the breakdown and then see that all of it in statistics would say it's not a significant number, right? It's not significant, and therefore if it's not significant, then it means it's something we should not worry about. Okay. All right, ethical clearance. Are students allowed to test the water? Checking if they will be given access to data in a particular company or industry for research purpose before getting the ethical clearance to avoid disappointment later in their research journey. Having an informal conversation, yes, that is allowed. But I think one of the things that the university tries to do is to try to avoid possible challenges and possible problems where you start talking to your potential participants before any formal work and consent. But if it's informal conversation, as you say, testing the water and not really doing any kind of research or work, one can have an initial conversation, but with an understanding that that initial conversation does not bring about any expectations, right? So it's always tricky. And I would encourage you to maybe check with your supervisor whether that is something that is possible or feasible. I've had a student who's done that and actually attended a session with the relevant stakeholders that they were interested in for the research that they're going to be doing. And then within that framework, within that space, attending that session, started having conversations about the research that they're intending to embark on, and that they're looking into the possibility of having conversations. And then, was told that, okay, when that time comes, let's have a formal conversation. But in principle, we would be amenable to listen to the request that you would put forward. So it was not going to, the student then knows that it's not going to be an automatic no, but obviously the yes or no is going to be dependent on what's on the information sheet, what it is that you're going to be doing. That will determine the final answer, but that they would give you a listening ear. Okay. Yeah, no, Ramadimich, it's always a tricky one, as I've said, on ethical clearance. Okay. Anonymous, how does a PhD by publication work? I think there's going to be a session in that, and I'm going to encourage you to attend that session. Because I know it's something that's still new at UNISA, that was not in policy yet that students can just take. So it's something that the university recently started. And so the duration again would be very difficult for me to assist you with that. I've not worked in that space with the colleagues, and I've not had students embarking in that on that route. But I know that there's a session on this, so I'm going to encourage you to please attend that session, because again the question is are the manuscripts meant to be published or accepted, or how many published and how many accepted, right? And how many would be required for them to be allowed to then be accepted for a PhD. I know some institutions already and have already been doing this, and some people might think it's the easier or quick way, and it actually isn't. Some people might actually do take much longer when they go the PhD by publication route, because it's not easy to get your paper accepted. Hey, it's not easy to get your paper published. And you'll see when we have the publication session that sometimes you submit a paper and a year later, the paper is still not published, right? And if you're required to publish 3 papers, what does that mean? Sometimes a paper, yes, within 6 months it can, but also there's also a requirement in terms of what kind of journals one should publish in, right? When we're saying reputable journals, what are we talking about? The DHET list that I talked about, so it has to be the journals that are in there. And sometimes it takes longer because it comes back for major revision, and then it goes back, it goes to the reviewers. Sometimes the reviewers that initially reviewed your work are not available or willing to review again. New reviewers have to be appointed. Now it means fresh eyes are looking at your work, and they're looking at it as if they're reading, as if it's a new submission, so to speak. And also that might add into the time. And sometimes to get feedback might take months, because reviewers are us, right? Academics are the reviewers. So you get a request to review a paper, and it gets you in the middle of other commitments that you have. They give you 6 weeks to review, but you might find that when the review comes today, the email saying, please review and give us feedback in the next 6 weeks. I have commitments in the next 2 months or the next 3 months where I've got deadlines. And then I can say, I'm willing to review, but unfortunately, it's not going to be in 6 weeks because there are these other deadlines that take precedence. And because sometimes it's so difficult to get reviewers, the editor of that journal might say, yes, it's okay. You can give me feedback after that 3 months. And after the 3 months, I review, and then I say, this paper needs a lot of work, major review, right? So it's been 3 months, you're waiting for feedback. It comes back to, it says, major review. So you're going to take how long to revise? And then you're going to resubmit. That's already 6 months down the line. You see what I mean? So I think in the session around PhD by publication, these are some of the depths and nuances that would be looked at in relation also, or going beyond just how many are required, how many outputs are required for one to complete the degree. Okay. And I see your question was also going there as well, whether the chapters or the articles rather need to be published first before you can complete the degree, or proof of submission. Proof of submission can never be enough. Proof of submission is for you who are doing your PhDs by research, because you've done the research, you've done the work, you've done these 3 years. So it's good enough for the university that you submit. But it can never be good enough to just submit and then we give you a PhD. No, the work needs to have been reviewed, and that's why it would then qualify for you to attain a qualification, right? Because if it has been accepted or if it has been published, then it means reviewers, peers in the field have engaged the work, they've given feedback, and after giving feedback, they have said this work is good enough, this work is of good enough standard and quality that it can be published. So that's why even accepted is also okay. All right. And only then can you be awarded that PhD when that required number of outputs have been submitted and accepted and published. Okay, so I hope that answers you. All right, Musa, you're welcome. Ramatimeji, so you said bursaries like the NRF and all the other ones you mentioned cover expenses like transport costs, accommodation, etc. I had connection issues and I didn't get this one clear. Is there a comprehensive list of all these funders? Where do we start? Okay, Ramatimeji, like I've just said with the publication issue, that we're going to have sessions where we're going to be talking about what is it that needs to be in place to write a manuscript and to have a manuscript published. So we're going to have sessions focusing on publication, right? So the same here as well, even with the funding. We're going to have sessions later in the year where we're going to be focusing on funding. And there, I will ensure that I compile a list of funders, and particularly for M&D, because the session that we're going to have even goes beyond the PhD funding, because the idea or our hope is that you're also thinking beyond PhD in terms of being researchers, in terms of being scholars, and that you will also apply for funding for bigger projects, for collaborative projects as well. But for your master's and PhD, there are specific funders that provide funding to assist you to attain your qualification first before you can think beyond. So I've taken note of your question. And I will make sure that I try and put together a list for you. But in the meantime, you can just go online. You can just go online and search for funding for M&D studies in South Africa, or funding for M&D studies in Africa, because some would then require you to study abroad. Okay, so there are some scholarships that are there that are available, but then there are scholarships for studying in all these other countries. So if Belgium gives you a scholarship, there has to be a connection and a link to Belgium. And sometimes that scholarship is for you to study in Belgium, for example. Okay, so looking specifically at funding that is available for studying in South Africa is what I'll try and put together for you, right? But if it's maybe something that you're interested in quickly, I would encourage you to go online. Go on the NRF website itself, go onto the Oppenheimer Memorial Trust website, because another thing also is that we also need to take into consideration deadlines, right? So some of the funding period, you might find that maybe when we have our sessions later in the year, that maybe the closing date would have passed for applying for funding for this year. But ideally, I'm hoping for all of us that you're looking for funding for 2025 and not for 2024. It's already July. So chances of getting funding for 2024 are close to zero now. So we're looking into 2025. But even for 2025, some funders, their closing date is quite early, because they know sometimes the reviewing process and the number of applications that they receive require a lot of time for them to come up with or to come to a decision to say that we will be funding you for 2025. So I hope that assists. Please go and check online. But for now, the ones that I can think of on top of my head, outside of just the UNISA bursary itself, is the NRF, for those in the social sciences and humanities, there's the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, NIHSS, please go to their website. The Oppenheimer Memorial Trust, please go to their website. And I really want to stress the Oppenheimer Memorial Trust because it's across disciplines, but also because I've also noted that they don't receive a lot of applications from UNISA. So I would really like to encourage you. It's a very good scholarship to assist you with your studies. I serve there as a reviewer, so I get to see the applications that come through, and that's how I know that we don't get a lot of UNISA applications. And yes, it could be maybe many of you are not aware of it, hence I'm saying go online. I think when you go online, it does come up, but maybe for some, depending on how you search, it doesn't come up, but now you know of it, and I would like to please encourage you to apply for that funding opportunity. Okay. Hello, Vivian. I will surely keep asking myself why I embarked on the doctorate journey so that I can be resilient and also persevere. Wonderful. I'm so happy. Please keep doing that. Hello, Curtis. Can one engage with you via email regarding clarity to my studies or even meeting with you? Yes, absolutely. You can drop me an email and then we can take it from there. But also my colleagues have that information and the details, and they can be able to assist you in that regard. So I see my colleague has provided you with the email address that you can use. So you can send an email there and then they'll be able to connect you with me. Okay, I hope that helps. Hello, Anonymous. I'm very well, thank you. I hope you are too. Is it mandatory for master students to publish their work before they graduate? Yes, it is. So, and this is there in your M&D procedure book, ne? And again, I'm going to encourage you to please familiarize yourself with it. At some point, maybe when we have another blast session, I will also use the opportunity to touch on some of the pertinent points that I think are important. The whole M&D procedure is important for you, so familiarize yourself with it like a Bible for your studies. But I think I'll also maybe just take on some points just based on frequently asked questions and things that you absolutely have to pay attention to. And so I'll do that at a later stage. But to answer your question, yes, the requirement for publication is for both master and doctoral students. So if you're a master student, you're expected to have submitted one article, okay? And for PhD, you are expected to have submitted 2 articles, okay? So that is the expectation. If there are any students here who are doing their masters by coursework, for you guys, that expectation is not there, or that requirement is not there, okay? Because what you produce is a mini dissertation, because you're also doing coursework. So if you are, then you are not expected to produce an output, okay? So masters, if Anonymous, if you're doing a full dissertation master's, then yes, you have to submit 1 output, 1 article to a journal. Okay. Okay, Curtis, a follow-up from you. Some professors around UNISA, when you critique their books or journals, which is related to my study topic, they take it in the wrong way and refuse to help or meet again. Why is that, Ganti? Hey, Curtis, that's a very difficult question for me to answer, because it's also very subjective, right? And unfortunately, I cannot speak for my colleagues. And I cannot imagine or know the reasons behind how they approach things. So it's a very difficult one. Scholarship is a very personal project or process. I was talking earlier about how when you receive feedback, even you as a student, as some people might take it personally. And I always say to students that remember, it's about the work. You are not your work. So it's about the work that you're producing. And you need to be able to see yourself and understand yourself outside of your work, right? And also understand that the critique, again, the difference between critique and criticism. So it's different when I criticize you, and it's vis-a-vis when I critique you, because sometimes criticism tends to take on a personal angle to it, which obviously can be problematic, because then it's like you are attacking me as a person, right? Whereas when you are critiquing, it's about what you've produced. It's about the work, saying that this is what you've written, this is what you produced. And my reading of your work, I find that this is not coming out clearly, or this is not coming out for me, or that this has not been included. And I think if it was included, it might have assisted in 1, 2, or 3 ways. And that offers me the opportunity to then justify why I did not include that, or to say, oh, I did not think of it that way. Actually, you're correct. So in my next writing, or as I move forward with this work, I'll actually take that into consideration. We go to conferences, we present our work, and we put ourselves out there to colleagues, critiquing us, providing us with feedback. And unfortunately, I think, again, it comes back to the subjective that as human beings, as people, for some of us, it's different to be able to separate or divorce ourselves from the work that we're doing, because this work is so much part of us. And I think for all of us, our work is so much part of us. But then the ways in which we respond to how others engage with our work differs from person to person. And I'm sorry about the experience that you had. And how that might have affected you, because refusing to meet again, then it means also it means not having the opportunity to continue the conversation, and not having the opportunity to taking the work forward in some ways. So obviously, I would not know what transpired and what happened and how things were said, right? As you say, that maybe people take things in the wrong way, and that's not what you meant, right? And if you feel that there was a need or an opportunity to continue the conversation, consider writing an email. And then expressing what you would like to express in an email, and see if maybe that might help. And if it still doesn't, then I would encourage you, Curtis, maybe to just bow down and bow out, and then continue on the work that you're doing. Unfortunately, sometimes that's what needs to happen. But if it's something that you think is important for you to continue the conversation on, write an email to the colleague or colleagues, and then take the conversation forward and see where that lands you. Right. But I apologize for that experience that you had. But like I said, people are not the same. I'm just starting my PhD program, so it is overwhelming, understandably so. Who should I contact? Please help, Prof. I lost my motivation. Okay, Anonymous, you said you've just started. I'm really sad to hear that you've lost motivation so early on in the work, because I'm assuming that you're still busy with your proposal. And I'm wondering what happened there. Have you engaged with your supervisor? Because I always say the supervisor is the first point of contact. Have you engaged with your supervisor about how overwhelmed you're feeling? Because are you overwhelmed psychologically and feeling that you can't focus, you've lost interest in the work that you're doing, because I'd be interested to also know and understand what other things and issues are happening in your life that maybe could also be a contributing factor. Or is it just things related to the support or lack of support, or systems not working? Because I'm imagining that there are things that are making you to feel overwhelmed. So I would want to understand what those are. Okay. Maybe start first by engaging your supervisor. And as I always said, or always say rather, I apologize, that myself and other colleagues who are also providing these sessions are also here as additional or added support. And should you want to maybe have a conversation, speaking not only for myself rather, and not for my colleagues, that I'll be willing to have a conversation. But I'm at the same time very, very cautious, right? And conscious that our role or our work here is to support you on this journey and to support your supervisor at the same time, that as we are assisting you with this, that it's going to go back to conversations that you're going to have with your supervisor about some of the things that you would have learned here, that maybe you might want to have a further conversation with your supervisor about in terms of how to go forward with your work. All right. And so even as I'm willing to have a conversation with any one of you, it's always with a very conscious point or idea that not at any point would we want to replace your supervisor in providing you that support or motivation, but that it's alongside what your supervisor is already providing. Okay. All right. I hope that helps, Anonymous. Hi, Solomon. If I want to check my proposal for level of plagiarism using Turnitin for the first time, and if I want to use Turnitin for the second round to check plagiarism, doesn't it take the first file or document in its memory and reflect as plagiarism when I use it again? No. The simple answer is it's no. The software is designed in such a way that it doesn't do that. Otherwise, there would not be any point at all for us or for there to be an opportunity for you to submit it again, or for us to require you to submit it again. So that's why you would do it, and then it comes back, it says 43%, right? And then we sit with it and say, whoa, what's happening here? Where are the issues? How can we revise? How can we rework? And after that's done, then you subject it to Turnitin again. Ideally, with all the changes and revisions and reworking that we would have done, it will come back with a lower percentage, right? So it won't be reading it as plagiarism. Yes, it will know, it stays in its memory, it will know that this was submitted before. But when you're submitting it for the second time, it's not 100% the same document that you submitted the first time, because you've worked on it. So it still looks at it the same, and it will recognize it. And even as it recognizes it, but now because you've attended to what it has flagged before, it should come out looking different, right? So even though most of the content is still the same, the 57% that it did not red flag, that 43%, it will pick up, but then it will see that, oh, okay, it doesn't look the same anymore. And because it doesn't look the same anymore, what is it that still looks the same? What is it that is different? And with this that is different, is everything okay there, right? And that is why ideally we would expect that what comes back would be a lower percentage. And that is why you can submit and submit again and submit again. Okay. Prof, you advise us to contact the authors of the journals or the articles. that we like to engage more with people in the research world. Yes, I do. I did say that. Can you advise on the quickest method to get their email addresses since the journal does not contain such info? Ramadimich, I'm going to give you a challenge now, that you go online, you download an article by anyone, can even myself, anyone, and you will see that when you look at that article, and I'm sure you've looked at many articles, but of course you have not looked with that eye of looking for an email address. But email addresses are there. It's something that we are asked by all journals when we submit an article. For that reason, among others, I'm sure, but for that reason, that should an author or a reader want to contact an author, this is the email address that they're going to use. So even if the article has got 5 authors, or when the article has got 5 authors, there would be what we call the corresponding author, right? So the corresponding author would be the one whose email address would be there on that journal article. So even if it's 1 or 3 or 5 authors or 7 authors, there will always be an email address. So there won't be 7 email addresses of all the 7 authors. No, just the one author. And that author is called the corresponding author, right? So the email addresses are there, Ramadimich. So please go and have a look, and you'll see that the email address is there. And there's also what we call ResearchGate. It's one of these academic online databases, like academic.edu and Google Scholar and the likes. But what ResearchGate does is it allows people to have profiles and then to put their details there. So if you type somebody's name under ResearchGate, it will give you their details. This also helps for even when you are looking for an article and you can't find the full article online, just the abstract, and it wants you to buy it. When you go to ResearchGate and you look for that person's name, if they have a profile on ResearchGate, they will appear. And then you can send them even a message there, right? Not even an email, but a message there, dear so-and-so, I came across your article titled what, but I cannot access it. Would you mind sending me a copy of that article? So you can also do that as well. But yes, the email addresses are there on all the articles. The contact details of authors are there. Hello, Lorna. I also suggest that small groups made up of students on the same level, PhD first year, be created to encourage and motivate each other to keep going. Okay. I believe my colleague is listening. Thank you for that suggestion. It's something that we will bring to the attention of our management, the colleagues that are in charge in the College of Graduate Studies, that we should look at ways in which this can be possible. I'm not sure if such exists. If there is, my colleague will assist me. If we do have such possibilities already existing, then they can connect you to where you need to get this information. But otherwise, it's something that we'll definitely bring up. I think it is a good idea. I see my colleague is also in the process of responding here. And then I'll just come back to that also when she has responded. Then I think we have the last question before we call it a day or a night. Okay. All right, so there's the response for you, Lorna, that please send an email to the email address that I believe all of you by now know of by heart, pgsp@unisa.ac.za. So it seems there are such groupings, so you will definitely be assisted. Send an email there and indicate that you're interested in being part of these small groups, and my colleagues will connect you. Okay. Yes, it can be lonely, but it doesn't have to be. How do we get in touch with students who are in the finishing line for advice and motivation. Again, please send an email to pgsp@unisa.ac.za, and my colleagues will be able to assist you there. Are the schools allowed to connect students in the same school or college? Yes, they are. They are. And some actually do. Okay. So if you are in Graduate School of Leadership, you can check actually directly within the school and ask whether they have such in place. Some of them do. And that's why I was saying earlier, please find out, be proactive, ask, engage. Sometimes even when you attend the seminars, that's when you meet your fellow students. When you attend, that's when you meet people that you can also ask and check whether they are in some form of group or source. Some might even have WhatsApp groups also where they share resources and things like that that you might find beneficial. So please ask first in your school. They'll be able to tell you whether such exist in the school, but also send an email to pgsp@unisa. They'll also be able to tell you or connect you to such a group. But also please do attend some of these academic engagements, and then hopefully it'll start becoming less and less lonely as you do that. Okay. Can we share 2 manuscripts at the same time for doctoral thesis requirement or one after the other? Solomon, if you have had time to work on both of them at the same time, by all means. So there is no law or policy or order in this case. What's expected is that by the time you submit your thesis for examination, you need to have submitted 2 manuscripts for consideration by a journal or journals. Okay. Often journals would not anyway encourage you to submit 2 manuscripts to the same journal at the same time. So you would have submitted a journal, a manuscript at that journal and another manuscript at that journal. So maybe one manuscript would have been submitted 6 months before the other one or 3 months before the other one, or you've been working on them, if that is possible and you have all that energy and time, because it's quite time consuming, then you can submit them almost at the same time. But it's not a requirement that they have to be submitted at the same time. But if that's possible for you, you can do that. So that one is not a requirement at all, or there is no expectation or a rule in terms of how that should happen and the order in which it should happen. The expectation or requirement is that 2 manuscripts by the time you submit for examination. Okay. All right, everybody, it is actually 2 hours on the dot. And I'm not seeing any more questions. And I think with that, we shall pause it here for tonight. Thank you so much for your questions. You asked so many questions and very interesting questions. And thank you also just for your honesty as well and sharing your frustrations with me. I really appreciate that. And as indicated, please send your emails, your queries, your questions, follow up to pgsp@unisa.ac.za, and my capable colleagues will be there. They're always there to respond to you speedily. And if they need to connect you to me or with me, if there's a need for that, they shall do so as well. And with that, thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody, and I look forward to again engaging with you in our future session. All right, goodbye.